Well, good evening, everyone. Welcome to RNHS's Money Matters series. We're going to ask that you put your phones or computers on mute so that we can manage the background noise. We appreciate you taking time out this evening to join us. This is our monthly Money Matters session, and tonight's conversation is going to be around debt management, financial wellness workshop being presented by HERA, Housing and Economic Rights Advocates, who are great partners of ours. So again, if you can put your phone on mute, and we will attempt as the host to mute everyone. The great thing about this evening is that this isn't a meeting format. If you have been working with us during this online session, our Zoom meetings when we do our pre-purchase workshops have been in the webinar format, so we're not able to see everyone. But tonight it's in a meeting format, so hopefully we will have more engagement. There will be times to ask questions. And for those of you that are not familiar with Zoom, you have a bottom toolbar, and what we're going to ask, if you have questions, please put your questions in the chat box, and we will find time throughout the presentation to answer your questions. So without further ado, welcome. Richmond Neighborhood Housing Service is proud to put on this workshop talking about debt. As you know, we are advocates of ownership, and we know the two most problematic areas that one finds themselves is managing debt and having access to capital to purchase a home. So we wanted to get our expert. We call on HERA quite a bit when we are working with clients that are more in need of a deeper dive related to resolving debt issues. So very proud to have HERA be a partner of ours, and happy to introduce Natalie Lyon, who is a HERA attorney. So Natalie, take it away. Please introduce yourself, a little bit about HERA, and we appreciate you taking time with us this evening. Oh, and by the way, this is going to be recorded, so you will have access to the recording, so please share the information with friends and family who weren't able to join us this evening.
All right. Nikki, can you hear me? Yes. Okay.
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, good. Hi, all. My name is Natalie Lyons. I'm a senior attorney with Housing and Economic Rights Advocates, HERA for short. Before I begin, I just wanted to let everyone know I have a door in my apartment open because it's hot in my apartment. If people have a hard time hearing me, put it in the comments and I'll just shut that door really quick. So at the end of this presentation, we'll talk a bit more about what we do at HERA and the services that we offer. We offer a lot of services, legal assistance to individuals in a variety of areas, including helping homeowners with foreclosure issues, loan issues, helping people with their debt and credit issues, identity theft, student loans, a true variety of financially related things. So at the end of this presentation, there'll be a full list of the services that we provide and contact information if you want to reach out to us for assistance. So I'm going to go right into it. Today we're going to talk about debt and credit and how to navigate those often complicated and scary aspects of life. Before I talk about those specific things, I just want to talk a bit about our experience working with people who are struggling financially. There are studies, research that has shown that there's a connection between financial stress and health, which I'm sure is not surprising to anyone who's attending this. You know, all of us have experienced financial troubles, and it can impact all aspects of our life. And we know right now with COVID-19, people who are living paycheck to paycheck may not even be getting a paycheck. And that's a really hard reality that a lot of our clients and a lot of people are struggling with. I'm going to try to address some of the COVID relief that is related to the topics today. So I'll be sure to hit on those. So although we can't in this, although I can't give you all the winning lottery ticket to really solve the issues, and I wish I could. One thing that the studies and the research show is that one of the things you can do to reduce the stress of finances is to get a sense of control over those finances. I know from clients and from my own life that sometimes I avoid the mail. Sometimes clients avoid dealing with these things because it just seems so hard and impossible. But hopefully today you'll have some tools as to how to deal with the various aspects of your financial well-being and address issues that you may be experiencing. All right, so I will prompt for questions a few times, but as Nikki said, please go ahead, and if you have questions that pop up, just put it in the chat and we will get to them as we go along. Okay, so we're gonna start broadly with just talking about what credit and debt are. So credit and debt both relate to money you borrow on the condition that you're going to pay it back, usually with some interest added onto it. Credit is the amount of money you receive. Like if you get a credit card, your credit limit, that's the amount of money you receive and you can use up to that limit. Debt is the money that you owe. Debt is the amount that you've spent on that credit limit. Credit and debt can be helpful. And many, I want to say most Americans have some form of debt, whether it's a mortgage or a credit card, auto loans. They can be helpful to advance your life in one way or another. The problem is bad debt, good versus bad debt. Good debt doesn't set you far back so that you can't, so that puts you in a hole. Good debt helps you get ahead. So there are just some general questions that we recommend people ask themselves. For example, will taking out this debt help me be in a better financial position in the future? Can I afford to pay it back? How much will the credit cost me? One basic example of how to evaluate how a debt is going to impact you is the interest rate. So that, as you probably know, there are credit cards that offer 0% for a certain period of time, or a low interest rate. I think for credit cards, 10% would be a low rate. And then there are some where you're paying 20 to 30% interest rate. And that's just going to make it harder and harder to pay it back. When we talk about debt, there are two broad terms, broad ways of looking at debt: secured debt and unsecured debt. Secured debt is a debt that's tied to an asset. So a house, a car, those are examples of, if you have an auto loan, your car is securing the loan, and they can repossess your car if you don't pay on the loan. Same thing with the house. The house secures the loan, and if you don't pay on the loan, then they can initiate foreclosure proceedings. So examples are mortgages, auto loans, pawn loans is another example. Unsecured debt doesn't have an asset. So a credit card is a perfect example of an unsecured debt. So when we talk about credit card debt, and I want to be very careful to say, you know, I have credit card debt. Most people I know have credit card debt. It's not an aspect of judgment. It's just being careful how much you rely on them, because it may cost you so much more money to pay it back than you took out in the first place. So this is an example that we did. The assumption here is that you have this credit card. The balance is $6,081. I honestly don't know where we came up with that number. It's kind of a random number. And the interest rate on this is it's about 15%, 14.99%. Okay, so here's this is just to show the effect of only paying the minimum amount. You can pay the minimum amount and being paying on that debt forever, and then you end up paying, if you look at this first line, you You pay for 14 years. Your original balance was $6,081, but you end up paying $10,145. That's why people say pay more than the minimum amount, because when you're paying the minimum amount, you're basically paying interest and just a very small amount of the principal, which is the original amount of the debt. So, and then you can see as the payments get larger and larger over the minimum, then you're paying far closer to the original balance, which was $6,081. So this is just to illustrate that there are ways of dealing with credit and credit cards that are going to minimize your loss through interest. Okay. So what is a debt trap? You have your regular credit card, your MasterCard, you have student loans, you have mortgages, auto loans, and then you have these other types of credit that are really, it's like diving into a hole with no ladder to get out. That's why we call them debt traps, because of the nature of the agreement you're making with the lender. So a payday loan is an example of what we would call a debt trap. Now in California, I lived in the South for about 5 years, and it's very different in the South. California actually has some protections against making this too hard for people. In California, the amount you can take out in a payday loan is just $300. And the fees are higher, but there's a cap on the fees. They're higher than what a credit card would be. But what happens with these payday loans, where you, if you don't know what they are, you get a loan on the promise of that lender being able to cash usually it's your paycheck. So it's an advance on your paycheck. And then the fees make it so that you have to take out another one to pay on the previous loan. And so you just end up in this cycle of having to take out more payday loans to cover previous payday loans, and it's hard to ever get out of that hole. Deposit advance and tax advance loans, similar concept. You get out a loan secured by a deposit account or secured by the tax refund that you're going to get, and then there are the high fees and the difficulty in dealing with those fees. So debt traps you have to be very careful. You know, I realize, and I've worked with people who are struggling, really struggling. I can speak to one gentleman I spoke to who a close relative had passed away, and he couldn't afford to pay for the funeral. And so he took out payday loans for that purpose. And I don't know if he regrets that, because it was an important expense, being able to pay for someone's, burial rights. However, he was stuck in this cycle of paying over and over on and more money when the reason for getting the loan had long since gone by. So it's just something to try not to have to do. And if you do, just be very careful about how much you take out and thinking about how you're going to pay it off. Okay, so there are these affordable alternatives. I wish there were many more of them, but these logos and names on the bottom are some programs that are geared towards making debt to help people who are in a situation who need some money, and to do it in a way that they will be able to pay it back. For example, lending circles, which is there on the bottom, they focus on low income and marginalized communities. They offer loans at a 0% interest rate. Ways to Work, that one in the middle, they offer transportation loans. So someone who needs a car to get to and from work and can't get a loan, or the loan that they would get would have a very high interest rate, Ways to Work is an organization that offers these very low interest loans to obtain transportation to work. One of the things on this slide that's super important is TILA is a law, and it's a law that requires lenders, like credit cards. If you have a credit card and you look at your annual statement, you'll see this box. This box is how you can figure out, okay, how much is the annual percentage? How much interest rate? How much is the interest rate that I'm being charged? Are there any finance charges that could be added? I'm sorry, I take that back. The interest rate, the finance charge is the amount that will be charged on top of your debt because of the interest rate. So when the interest rate gets applied to how much you owe, the finance charge is the amount that they then add on to the debt. The amount financed is going to be the amount of credit you were extended. So if it's a credit card and your credit line is $7,000, that's the amount financed. And the total number of payments is the amount you will have paid after after you've made all payments as scheduled, right? So when you look at a credit card statement, it'll show the minimum payment. And then just like that, I'm gonna go back to this slide. Just like this slide right here. It's the amount at the end of the TILA box will show you how much, if you're paying the minimum payment, how much total you will pay in the end. So this box is very helpful for you to see basically the cost of taking out this credit and to make a informed decision about whether it makes sense for you to do it. Sometimes you have no choice, but sometimes if you think about these aspects of the credit, you can then decide, okay, how important is it that I get this credit advance right now? Can I go without this money, or do I really need it? And you can also use this box to shop around for other credit that might have a better interest rate, and therefore you won't end up paying as much. Okay, so personal installment loans are another way that folks can get some cash when they need it. Here on this slide, we're calling them two general flavors. The one on the left is the better flavor. The one on the right is the less delicious flavor. So on the left, we're talking about personal loans from banks or credit unions. And then on the right, we're talking about personal loans from, for example, a check cashing store or online lenders. Generally speaking, the personal loans from the banks and credit unions are going to be better. They're going to have a lower interest rate. You're going to be able to pay it off quicker. You're not going to pay as much in interest. And you can see from these two boxes, and these boxes replicate that box I was showing you before, the TILA box, I'm going to call it, where you can look and compare. So for example, this is just generally, if you're getting your personal loan from a credit union, then you're going to get an interest rate that's lower than the interest rate you're going to get at a check cashing store. Now, I didn't put this box together, so I can't tell you if 100% is standard or commonplace with check cashing stores, but it's just going to be much higher. And you can see when it is much higher, you end up spending a lot more. You end up almost doubling or more than doubling the amount you originally took out. And your payment is higher. So generally we recommend, if you can, to get personal loans from banks or credit unions. Sometimes they are tougher and their approval is more stringent. So don't forget that we have these affordable alternatives that are geared at folks who are low income, who are marginalized. So it's always good to see what might be out there in terms of getting some cash to get you by before just going with the first thing that you know about, or going online and clicking on an offer and just saying yes. Okay, I believe we're going to enter a new section. So if there are any questions now, Nikki?
Yes, they are. So we have a couple of questions coming in. So when you get a payday loan and it gets sent to collections, then they want to settle less than what's owed. Should people pay the lower amount or pay the full balance?
That question, there are a lot of parts to it. We're going to talk next about debt collection and how to proceed. It really depends on the situation. I hate to say it that way, but the reality is, if you're in debt collection, then and they're proceeding in a way that's lawful, eventually they could file a debt collection lawsuit, and then you'll be dealing with that. So settling is not a bad option if you can afford it. Settling can be a good idea. One of the things to be aware of, though, is often, I mean, I've seen these settlement agreements that debt collectors will send clients, and they can be, there can be terms in there that make it really hard for you to stick with this settlement agreement, and then it could put you in a situation that is worse. So you need to look at what the settlement terms are. But if for example, you have a payday loan that you now owe, despite whatever you originally took out, you now owe $2,000 on it, and they're willing to settle for you to pay $1,000 over the course of a year, then I would just say, first of all, always negotiate. It does not hurt you to push back and say, I can't afford that. I can afford to pay $750 over the course of a year. And then also do the math and figure out how much each monthly payment would be. Ask them specifically, how do I pay you? How do I pay you, and when do I pay? In the settlement agreement, you probably want some term that says that if you pay, 5 days late, they won't say that the agreement is gone. You just want to look at the terms and make sure you can meet the terms. So if you can settle and you can do it at an amount that you really believe that you can pay, then there's no problem with that. You just have to be careful about looking at the fine print, and then also being really sure that you can pay, because usually if you go into one of those agreements and then you can't pay, then again, what I said before, you could end up in a situation that's worse than you were before. We do assist people with these types of issues. So like I said, at the end, there will be our contact information, and you can reach out if you have a situation like that you want some advice on. Was there a second question?
Yes, Natalie. Another question is asking, do you have any recommendations for someone who has student loans?
We're going to talk about student loans. I am almost 100% positive. Yeah, we're going to talk about student loans. So I'm going to defer that question until then. But if there are follow-up questions once I've talked about student loans, feel free to ask. Is that it, or is there more?
Yeah, I think that is it on the questions for now.
Okay, great. All right. Oh, I forgot these. Sorry. Okay. So now we're going to talk about debt collection. So you have a debt, and I'm just going to use the credit card example because it's easy. You have a credit card. The first thing that has to be the case in order for debt collection to even be something that they can do. I mean, they can't start calling you and hounding you if you're making on-time payments. But if you're late on a payment, they can start to reach out to you and to, try to get you to pay. this timeline right here is the timeline, we'll call it the debt collection timeline. So there's a delinquency. Delinquency is basically so usually it's a 30-day payment time frame. So if you're late on a payment, you enter into delinquency, but usually I don't think they're going to treat you as delinquent until the next payment or till right before the next payment. So 30 days after you missed a payment. Eventually, after 120 or 180 days of being delinquent, so that means after, I have to do math to figure this out for myself, 6 months up to 6 months of not making payments. So now you've been late one payment, but then you've been late continuously up to 6 months, 120 to 180 days. Then the lender, the creditor, in this case, the creditor is going to be the company that issued you the credit card. So let's say it's a MasterCard. So let's say the creditor is MasterCard. They can then report your debt as charged off. If you've heard that term before, a lot of people misunderstand it. It's really just an internal thing that creditors do to indicate to their own staff and to other, I don't know who they indicate it to, that they're not expecting to get this money. So it's not, understanding what charge off means doesn't really matter. It's just a triggering point. At that time, what can happen is they can sell your debt, your MasterCard credit card debt, to a debt buyer. They can start collecting. They can hire a debt collection agency to start trying to get the money from you. And so that's when you start to hear from these companies who you've never heard before. So your debt is we're going to say it's a MasterCard. Usually you're getting these monthly statements from MasterCard or from Citibank. But now you're hearing from this company called LVNV or Rash Curtis. I mean, these are some of the names that I know of debt collectors and debt buyers. And they come into the scene usually after you've been charged off. We're going to go into all of this in more detail. So I'm just going to show the timeline to you, and then I'm going to move on and be more specific. So after a certain point, then they can sue you saying you owe this money. The statute of limitations, which is basically their deadline for suing. If they don't sue within 4 years, then they can't sue. So that's why the statute of limitations matters. So, and then if they sue you, then you end up in these proceedings in court on the debt and on their claim that you owe them that money. And we will talk more about it, but just as a note, if you end up in a situation where you're served a complaint about a debt that you didn't pay, the absolute most important thing is to not ignore it. Because the nice thing about court proceedings is you have all of these opportunities to delay them being able to collect from you and figure out how you can deal with this in a way that either makes it go away or that where you end up paying less and they settling the case. The worst thing to do is to ignore it, because if you ignore it, then they can basically get a default judgment against you, which is this last part of the timeline. And a default.
And I apologize, Natalie, before you move on, and it's really in line with what you were mentioning and maybe talking to what a collection agency can or cannot do, because the question is, can they issue a warrant out for your arrest if you don't pay on time?
No.
And if someone has been threatened in that way, will you talk about some of the rights that consumers have and the things they can do if collectors are crossing the line and how they're trying to collect
Okay.
payment.
I believe, I'm going to look and make sure I'm right, but I believe, yeah, we have a slide on that. So I'll go into that. But the initial answer to that question is no, 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 no. That is totally wrong. It is not a crime to not pay on your debt. I mean, these collection agencies, the lawsuits that they bring are civil lawsuits. To say that they could arrest you is just absolutely not correct. And I will go into more of the things that you can do to get them to stop harassing you. So I'll do that on a different slide. So eventually, you know, if you do get sued, it's not the end of the world. Don't ignore it because you don't know what to do. You can always call us, and also Bay Area Legal Aid. There are other organizations that help people with these lawsuits. And it's really so much better to be just showing up in the lawsuit and doing the things that the court requires you to do, because that gives you time to figure out how to deal with it. Okay, so when you're dealing with a debt collector, these debt collectors are just unbelievable. They will make you feel like a bad person. They will make you feel apparently like they can arrest you. And it's really just wrong. But the reality is this is what they do. So you just want to have certain things in your mind when you get a call from a debt collector. First of all, when you get a call from anyone you don't know, anyone, even if, and there's a lot of this happening right now that's not just debt collection. There are a lot of, I'm getting calls about my student loans saying, you know, the Department of Education or the IRS is wanting information from me. Don't give out that information. Those people are not the IRS. It's not the Department of Education. They're trying to get you to give them your social security number, your date of birth, so they can steal your identity. So just, you get a phone call, you get an email from someone you don't know, don't give them any information. When you're talking with debt collectors, if they're calling you about a debt, first of all, you don't have to speak to them. You can, if they call you, you can simply on the phone, you can say, please send me information about this debt in writing. I won't speak to you until I have it in writing. As I said before, don't give out social security, bank account, date of birth, address, any information about yourself. And if you feel threatened or bullied, hang up. You are not obligated to talk to them. When you do hear from debt collectors, whether it's in writing or by phone, keep records of it, take notes. So if you get a phone call, take down, I'm going to go into this more in the next slide, but take down the date and time, and then try to get more information, like who are they calling on behalf of? If it's a debt collector, as we talked about before, it could be that it's an agency who's trying to collect the debt for another company. So if we were talking about that MasterCard we were talking about before, it could be someone else calling you about the MasterCard. So you can say, who are you calling for? And they should tell you, they may or may not, but they should say, I'm calling for MasterCard. Keep copies of all of the letters you receive. That could be useful down the road if you end up in some kind of situation where they're violating the law, or where you've been sued by the creditor or the debt buyer. Just keep everything. Don't throw it out. And then just get advice. If you are served with a debt collection lawsuit, you have to respond within 30 days. If you don't, then you can get a default judgment. And like I said, HERA assists people with this. Bay Area Legal Aid, East Bay Community Law Center, they all provide assistance to people who have been sued on a debt. Just remember, if you get a complaint, if you are served, meaning someone hands you a complaint, or even if they mail it, you have 30 days to do something. And so you just need to get that legal advice as soon as you can. And really, it's not hard. It doesn't take much time to put together the documents that you need to put together to respond. And then you've assured yourself that you're not going to get a default judgment, and you can move forward in the case in a way that maybe you end up in a better situation. Dealing with debt collectors. I'm just gonna, real quick, I'm gonna look at see if, yeah, okay. We have multiple slides on this, so I'm just gonna go slide by slide. So before you pay anything to a debt collector, you wanna make sure that they have a right to collect this debt. You wanna make sure that you even owe this money. You don't know that you owe this money, because often, like I said, and maybe you've experienced, it could be the name of some company you've never heard of. And so you have no idea what this is about. I'm just making sure I'm covering everything. So you can ask the debt collector, this is what I was talking about before, the name and address of the original creditor and the original account number. That way you can check your records and say, oh, right, that was the MasterCard that I had 2 years ago and I stopped making payments on it. Or you could look at the original creditor and the account number and say, I don't even think I ever had this account. This is not my account. You can ask the debt collector for all of this information on this slide. The date the account was opened, the date of the last recorded payment, the date that the debt was sold, if it was sold. We're going to talk more about that in other slides. The amount of the debt when it was sold, the name, address, and phone number of the debt collector, the amount of the debt. And you can ask the debt collector basically for what's called debt validation. That's this term up here on the top of the slide. You can ask the debt collector to send you documents showing that this is a debt that they have a right to collect on and that you owe. So those documents could be the original agreement that you signed. I mean, none of us really sign these, but it's the box you check when you take out a credit card. But they have to send you all of that. And so then you can look at that and try to figure out if this is actually something that you owe. I mean, in the case of identity theft, it may not be. And we're going to talk about credit reports later in this presentation, but that's one way to learn if you get information about a debt and you just don't think it's yours, then we'll talk about pulling your credit report and trying to figure out if maybe there's been some identity theft. And so one of the other things to say about these debt validation requests, when you get a debt collector calling you, you can say to them on the phone, you can ask them for all of this information on the phone. And who knows? I mean, you know, it's like customer service, folks. Like, you just don't know if you're going to get a person who's going to be helpful or if they're just going to be withholding. So the best thing to do then is to, at minimum, get the name, address, and phone number of the debt collector, the person, the company calling you. And then you can write a letter to that address and ask for all of these other things. In the letter, you say something like, I got a call on this date at this time about a debt, and I want you to send me all of this information about the debt, including the agreements and statements and things like that. And then they're required by law to then send you that information. And we have, I'm just looking again in my slides because, yeah, I'll be showing you an example of what a letter like that looks like later. Here it is. Sorry, I get myself excited. Okay, so this is what a letter might look like. You can see it, and just for everyone to know, my understanding from Nikki is that the PDF version of this presentation will be sent out to people. So you'll have a copy of this and you can just replicate it in a letter. And it doesn't have to be typed. You can handwrite it if you don't have access to a computer. The only thing I would say is if you want to write a letter like this to try to find out more about what this debt is, send it, but make a copy of it to prove that you sent it. You can also just take a picture with your phone. So this is the sample. Here you're going to put the address. That's why it's important to know the name and at least the address of the debt collector. Otherwise, you're not going to have anywhere to send the letter. If you can get the account number when you're on the phone with them, that'll help them track the debt that they say you owe. And then you just fill in this information with anything they said about the debt. You know, they might tell you, well, this is a MasterCard and you owe $3,650. So you put that in there. And then you can say, I don't have any responsibility for the debt, or I don't know if I have responsibility for this debt. And if you believe I am, mail me the documents. Now, this next part of the letter we're going to talk about it more in the next slide, but they have rules about what they can do when they're trying to collect. You can also say, please stop communicating with me until you respond to this letter. So you can say, until you send me the documents showing that this is a debt that I owe, you cannot communicate with me. And by law, they shouldn't communicate with you after you've said that to them. Okay. So we'll move on to the next one. This is about your rights when dealing with a debt collector. So going back to that question about can they threaten to arrest you? That falls under harassment and threaten. No, they can't. It's against the law for them to do that. So you can say to whoever is getting this call, I would suggest saying something like, you are harassing me, you are threatening me, and that is a violation of the law. Please stop calling me. You can also say, please only communicate to me via mail. If you decide you're going to send one of these letters to get them to send you more information, you can also put in the letter somewhere down here, all future communications need to be in writing. I do not want to receive any calls, and they shouldn't call you after you say that. That's getting at that point. So I just said those things. You can tell the debt collector how they can and can't contact you. So if you don't want phone calls, you can tell them the only way you can contact me is by writing. But again, it's really important to make sure these requests are in writing, because if you say it on the phone, you have no proof that you said it. But if you have proof that you said it, their job is by law that they should follow your request to only communicate in writing, to stop communicating until they send you documents. These are rights you have under law, but your only way of proving that you asked for those rights, that you enforce those rights, is if you put the request in writing. So that's why it's just a good idea to do that. And again, I'm a lawyer, so I have to say it. Always take a picture or make a copy of anything that you send them so that you have proof that you sent it. So some of the just general rules are, they are not permitted to call before 8 a.m. or after 9 p.m. So that's why it's important to take notes on the dates and times, because if they're calling outside of that time frame, then they're violating the law. They're not permitted to harass you or threaten you. They're not permitted to talk to other people about your debt. So they can't call your boss. They can't call your work and say, I'm calling for, I'll use my name, I'm calling for Natalie Lyons. She owes MasterCard $2,050. If they do that, they're violating the law. They can call a third party and verify your address, but they can't talk about the debt. They are not allowed to communicate with other people about the debt. They can't lie. That person who is saying that they had a warrant for the person for someone's arrest is lying, because that's just not possible. They can't demand more than you owe. They can't add unauthorized fees. So these are all rules. They're by law, and you are within your rights to talk about that. When you get a call that is doing any of these things, you can say, I know my rights. You aren't allowed to threaten me. You aren't allowed to lie and say that you can arrest me. I know that you can't. That probably will shut them down a bit, but I would suggest the letter to really get just to really understand what's going on, because these I've never worked for a debt collector, but my guess is that they instruct these callers to not give much information, so you're in the dark and you don't really know what's going on. Okay, so for people who do have student loans, I'm just doing some updates on the COVID-19 law. The law that was passed by Congress is called the CARES Act. And under the CARES Act, even if your student loan was in default going into the CARES Act, which went into place in March at some time, they are not permitted to collect on your defaulted student loan debt until after September 30th. So if you're getting collection calls or emails or letters about a defaulted student loan, I should say the student loan has to be a federal student loan and not a private student loan. But if it's a federal loan, like a direct loan or a Stafford loan, Perkins loan, Fell loan, any of those, they should not be collecting on those loans right now. And then after September 30th, they can, unless Congress extends that, and who knows what Congress is going to do. Oh, I'm so sorry about that noise. Okay, I'm going to move to the next slide. Okay, so dealing with debt collectors. I mean, there are options. You can pay the debt in full, but if you could have done that, you probably would have. You can negotiate a settlement for a reduced amount. We talked about that with the payday loan example. Get it in writing. That's a very basic point. Get it in writing. Whatever the terms are, make sure it's in writing, and also then read the terms, because they're going to draft the settlement agreement, and you want to make sure there's nothing in there that will ultimately be a pitfall for you. You can dispute the debt. If we go back to the slide with the letter, you can say, I don't have any responsibility for this debt if you don't think you do. And then that's when they have to prove it up to you. And the way they do is they send you the documents showing the monthly payment statements, the original agreement, and you can look at that and say, okay, oh yeah, I have this credit card, I forgot about it, or I don't really think this is mine. They can still take you to court, and then you'll just have to deal with that dispute in court. You can discharge a lot of debts in bankruptcy. Just to note that federal student loans are very hard to discharge in bankruptcy. People will go into bankruptcy and still come out with their student loans intact. It's a very hard standard to get rid of your student loans in bankruptcy. And then also you can just, tell the debt collector to stop contacting you. It doesn't make the debt go away, but that is one way just to deal with the annoying, harassing behavior. Okay, so we talked earlier about debt buyers. And debt buyers, it's important to understand what a debt buyer is. So what I said before is, at some point, if you're in collection, you might start getting communications from companies whose names you just don't know. And it could be that company is just a debt collection agency and they work for MasterCard, right? And they're just doing the collection work for MasterCard. Or it could be that the company whose name you don't know is a debt buyer. I need some water. A debt buyer is this company, organization, who once your debt has been delinquent for the certain period of time and it's been charged off by your creditor, the MasterCard, the Citibank, the Capital One, then a company can buy that debt from the creditor. When they buy it, they don't spend if say the debt is $3,000, that's the last amount that you owed. The debt buyer isn't going to pay MasterCard $3,000. They're going to pay MasterCard something much less. And the reason why it works that way is because MasterCard has now decided there's no way I'm going to get this money. They've charged it off because they just are like, I'm not going to be able to get this money, so I'm charging it off. And the debt buyer is going to take that chance that they may not get the money, and they're not going to pay the $3,000. They're going to pay something less than that to MasterCard, and then they're going to start harassing and trying to collect it from you. So that's how it can happen, that you are getting these letters and phone calls from this company that you don't even, you've never heard of them, and they're saying you owe them money. And so then it very well might be a debt buyer. With debt buyers, there's a whole different set of laws. They are supposed to have specific information, evidence of your debt. What that means is maybe they have copies of the monthly statements. That would be evidence of the debt. They are supposed to tell you in writing that you have a right to this information. They're supposed to give you copies of the evidence of the debt within 15 days of requesting it, or stop collecting until they do. And they're supposed to notify you that they cannot sue or report to the credit agencies about any debt that is past the statute of limitations. We talked about the statute of limitations. So when we say time barred, that means if your last payment was over 4 years ago, they can't sue on the debt. So it's a time barred debt. So there's basically, the debt can still be there, but they can't do anything legally to make you pay it. They're supposed to notify you about that. And then there's some requirements about original language contracts if the initial contract was in a language other than English. Now, it's not necessarily the case that they do all of these things, but these are the rules they're supposed to follow. And so if you know those rules, you can call them on it. And you can also get them to send you whatever evidence that they have about this debt. One of the things that we know from the work that we do is that a lot of these debt buyers don't have much evidence. And that can be very useful if they sue, because ultimately they can't prove that you owe this money. Then you can potentially, we've had clients who got sued by a debt buyer and they didn't, and the debt basically eventually the case went away because we helped them fight the case. And as it turned out, the debt buyer didn't have the evidence that they needed to prove up that the client owed the money. And so the case got dismissed. That can be a really helpful result when you're in a situation where you're struggling financially. And it's one reason why you just always should need to respond. And, if you get a complaint, respond, because if you respond within 30 days, then you have options. And if it's a debt buyer, you have probably more options than you would if it were the original creditor.
And Natalie, before you go into the next slide, we've been getting a number of questions, so I wanted to take the time to ask them. And also,
let me just get water real quick. My throat is. I'll be right back.
Sure. So I am collecting everyone's questions. So now that we are asking questions, this would be a great time to put your questions in the chat box, as well as I'm hoping possibly we can save the last 10 minutes of the presentation to go live, meaning if you raise your hand to be able to ask your question directly, if you haven't been able to ask in the chat box. So Natalie, if you're ready, and then also Natalie, just a point, we are about at 7:20, and we do want to, spend maybe the last 10 minutes on additional questions.
Yes.
So since everyone will have access to this presentation, if you have any thoughts about just highlighting some of the key points, knowing that everyone will have this information, that if that's helpful as far as managing time,
yep,
may be a consideration. So the first question is, what is a default judgment?
A default judgment is basically how that happens is we talked about you get served a complaint, and it's in these, we call them debt collection lawsuits. You get served a complaint. The complaint is by someone who says you owe them a debt. That could be the MasterCard or that could be the debt buyer. And then you have 30 days to respond. This is court rules, California court rules. You have 30 days to respond. That can be a little bit different depending on how they served you, but let's, for purposes of the presentation, let's just call it 30 days. If you don't respond in the 30 days, then you have defaulted in the courtroom. Basically, in the case, you have defaulted by not showing up. And at that point, then all they have to do is have the court say, this defendant has defaulted, and ask the court to issue a judgment against you on the money. So if you don't show up and the court declares you in default of the judgment and then issues a default judgment, then what they can start doing is they can start collecting on that judgment, on a court judgment. And that's very different than collecting without a judgment. If you have a judgment against you, they can start garnishing your wages, they can levy your bank account, and you can fight that. There are ways of fighting that, but the easiest, best way to deal with this is just to not default. It's to respond within 30 days of getting the complaint.
And the next question is, what about debt collectors representing student loans, such as Reliance Solutions? They say that they were contracted through the federal student loans. Since they have been updating my credit report, my score is lower than it's ever been. So any thoughts about Reliance Solutions and if that's a practice?
I believe I recognize that. I will say the Department of Education, U.S. Department of Education, who issues the federal loans, does contract with debt collection agencies. You can Google that, and I believe there's a page on the Department of Education's site that says these agencies work with us. But another way to figure out if it's legitimate is to call the Department of Education and ask them, is this a real thing? You know, is Reliance, did you hire them to collect on my loan? That, you know, that is the easiest way to just be sure. But they do contract out to collect on student loans, and we'll talk about credit reporting. So I'll get to that, how to sort of evaluate why your credit is being reported in the way it is, and if there are any problems, how to dispute it.
And then the next question is, someone has been was a collector years ago and wanted to know, is it still true if when they say they, I'm assuming the creditor does not respond in 30 days, that they need to remove it from your credit report? And with COVID going on, has that changed?
I'm not sure that I understand the question.
So it sounds like if you send out a dispute and the creditor does not respond in 30 days, are they required to remove it from your credit report?
I don't believe so. I haven't heard that.
Okay. And I think that may be going through, when you go through the credit bureau and you have a dispute, the credit bureau will go to that creditor to have them prove or show that the debt is correct. And if they don't validate the debt, then the credit bureau has the responsibility to take it off the credit report.
You have to investigate it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, if the debt is invalid, yes. I think it's more complicated than that, but they investigate it and they determine that this is an inaccurate reporting, then they have to correct it. So we're going to go more into, getting to your earlier point, Nikki, we're going to go more into credit reporting later. So I'll hold on this question.
Okay.
Make sure we have enough time.
Okay, and it says, can student loans affect your credit score during COVID-19?
That's a good question. No. And that is also something I'm going to talk about during the credit reporting section.
Okay. Do you recommend taking out a loan to pay off student debt? This individual is about $70,000 in debt with the Department of Education, and does the CARE Act stop the interest?
Ooh, CARES Act does not stop the interest. I don't believe, but I've got it on one of the slides. I did look into that just for this presentation. I don't think it's probably a good idea to get a loan to pay off your student loan debt. And the reason for that is student loan debt is some of the best. I'm sorry, this light is getting in the way of my face, I realized. A student loan debt, there are all of these options that you have when you have federal loans that you don't have when you have private loans. Options for making low payments if you can't afford to make higher payments. Options for consolidating and getting out of default. There are just a lot of, we're not going to go into all of those. But we do, again, we provide legal assistance to people with their student loans, so you can always contact us. But generally speaking, I would say don't take out a private loan to pay off a federal loan. The federal loan is likely going to have a better interest rate, and there are just many more options of dealing with the loan, even if it's behind.
And the other note you mentioned earlier that most creditors, banks, for unsecured debt, they're probably not going to exceed about $25,000. So if it is a significant debt, to be able to find installment or unsecured debt to cover is highly unlikely, because by that it's higher amounts, then of course they want some type of security to make sure that they'll get paid. Then the next question is, what if a person does not have a Social Security number for the student loan? Can they still collect from you?
I mean, if you owe money, they can collect.
Okay.
Yeah.
Can the lawyer collecting debt state that they will only remove a debt from your credit report, but they give difficult terms like only giving you 3 months and 3 payments? Otherwise, they won't agree to have it deleted once paid. Is that legal too?
Credit reporting is the law about credit reporting, which I will talk about, requires they're called furnishers. So there's the credit reporting agency, and that's Experian, Equifax, TransUnion, who issue the credit reports. And then there are the furnishers, who are the creditors, the lenders, and they report information to the credit reporting agencies. Those furnishers are required to report accurate information. That's what they're required to do. They have to do that by law. So these debt collection agencies, they come up with all kinds of things that they try to pressure you with, and indicate that the law requires it, or I don't really understand what that example is, but it sounds fishy to me, if I'm being honest. If they're trying to settle a debt, and they want to use credit reporting as a way to get you to agree to some terms, I think the key thing to know is if you got to look at the terms. If you can't pay in the terms that they're asking you to pay, then don't do it. Whatever they're saying about the credit reporting, they can't lie about what you owe or don't owe. They can maybe offer to delete information, delete what they call the trade line. I just would be really skeptical about any of that. And again, if you're dealing with a debt collector on a settlement, get it in writing, look at it, and if it seems not straightforward, you can always seek some legal assistance to get input.
Okay. And second to the last question, can they sell your debt over and over to other debt collectors?
Yeah, I've seen that.
Yeah. Which is why you want to validate debt, because there could be some duplication of the same debt.
And the likelihood, if it's been sold more than once, the likelihood that debt buyer actually has proof that they can use in court to get you to pay is less. It's just less and less likely the more it's bought.
Mm-hmm.
So that can be advantageous to you in court proceedings.
And then the last question for this session is it true that if the original debt was charged off by an original debtor, it is better not to speak to the debt buyer, etc., because it will start the clock again regarding statute of limitation?
The statute of limitations runs from your last payment. So it really doesn't matter who you talk to. It runs from your last payment. So what we generally tell people is to look at the date of your last payment, add 30 days just to be safe. So say my last payment on a credit card was March 5th. I'm trying to do math, which even the most basic math I'm not great at. March 5th, 2014. That was over 4 years ago, right? So it's a 4-year statute of limitations, and it runs as of your last payment, or to be safe, 30 days of your last payment. So I would take the date, I would add 30 days, and I would figure out whether 4 years have passed since that date. And if they haven't, then they can still sue you. If more than 4 years has passed, then they can't sue you on the debt, and it really doesn't matter whether it's a debt buyer or a creditor.
They may not get, so then can you clarify, they may not be able to sue, but can they still look to collect the debt?
Well, that's the sort of, it's if they can't sue, then that's really their only way of forcing you to pay. They can still collect. They can still call you and write you. But then when you get that call, you can say, I'm sorry, your statute of limitations has expired. You can keep trying to collect, but I'm not going to pay and you can't sue me. I mean, basically, that's how that works.
And if that was the option, then and I guess this goes into where we're going to talk about the credit bureau. If you have debt that you haven't paid, it will stay on the credit report as a collection until that time frame expires.
More than 7 years.
Yes. Okay.
Is that it, or?
That's it.
Okay, so being aware of time, I'm gonna be a little bit more speedy. I'm just gonna run through these, not super detailed. With medical debt here in California, there are programs, discounted payment plans and charity care. These apply. There's a state law that requires, they call them general acute hospitals. So think of your major hospitals, but basically any hospital is going to be a general acute hospital. They are required to have these plans, and the plans are applicable to people who are at a certain income status. It's 350% of the federal poverty rate. But basically what you should do is, if you're in a situation where you're having some kind of medical issue, ask them about, before they send you the invoice, before they start trying to get money from you, just immediately ask them about it. They're supposed to notify people, but they don't. So it's just good if you're in this situation to upfront find out about it. And then if you don't think about it when you're dealing with some crazy medical situation, ask them about it later. If you fit the income limits, then you have a right to these discounted plans. Student loans, federal student loans. When I say federal, I mean loans that are issued by the Department of Education or insured by the Department of Education. That's FEL loans, the FFEL loans, the direct loans, the Perkins loans, Stafford loans. Those are all federal student loans. As I was saying before, they have all of these, they're basically programs for dealing with the debt. Rehabilitation and consolidation, those are options for people who are in default. If you are in default on your student loans, you can take advantage of these programs to get out of default. You can only take advantage of each one time, but they can be very useful. We've helped a lot of clients get out of default with these programs. And then once you're out of default, you can go into income-based repayment, which basically some people, because their income is so low, are not required to pay any money at all, and they are still in good standing on their loan. So it's based on your income. It should be a low enough amount that you can actually make the payment. There are loan forgiveness programs. There are a lot of different types of programs where they either forgive the loans after you've made so many payments, or there are these discharges, statutory discharges, where if you have a disability, for example, you can get your student loan debt discharged. Those are more complicated processes, and we do assist clients with applying for these programs. Some of the other statutory discharges are, for example, if you went to a school and you didn't have a high school education, you may be able to take advantage of a discharge because they should have tested your ability to benefit from the education. And if they didn't do that, then the school could be accused of falsely certifying you for the loan. And there's some other discharges that are available. Mortgages, some of the things that you can do if you're in trouble with your mortgage is apply for a financial hardship modification, refinance, and then there are these local reinstatement assistance programs. Here in Oakland, for example, there are some programs where people who are Oakland and the broader Alameda County, though right now I think the money is dry, but I think the money's coming back. There are some programs for people who are struggling, homeowners, and if you fit the different qualifications, you can get some money to help you out of the situation you're in so you can be back in good standing. Scam alert, debt settlement companies. Just be very wary. I'm not going to go into all this because of time. I'm not going to go into too deep on this. As we were talking about before, just be very careful with anyone that's going to call you telling to help you with their debt, telling you owe them debt. There are these scams out there, and they're just so creative as to how they figure out to try to get people in, to try to take advantage of people. For example, if someone's telling you to stop paying your credit card bills because they're going to help you settle your debt, don't believe that. And I will also say that what we've seen in economic downturns like we're in right now, when there's a recession, these types of scams just really ramp up. So just be very careful about anyone calling you to offer you anything regarding your debt, your student loan debt, your mortgage, anything. And just be, very careful. Okay. What if I have a court judgment? So, and this I will also kind of go through fairly quickly. If you end up with a court judgment, say you defaulted and you got default judgment, or you went through the whole case and still the court found that you owe the money and you have to pay. They can then use that court judgment to get the sheriff to execute garnishment on your wages, bank account levies. There are things, as I said before, there are things you can do to fight it. For example, they can't garnish more than 25% of your wages. If they're trying to garnish more than that, then you can fight that. If you're low income, you can go to the court and say that I don't have enough income for this, and the court may decide that they can't garnish your wages. For example, one of the CARES Act provisions, these stimulus payments are exempted from garnishment. So if you haven't spent your stimulus yet, which I think all of us have, they can't be garnishing that. But this is a kind of complicated process. I mean, essentially, if you get into a situation where you're notified they're going to garnish your wages, or you get notice that your bank account is going to be levied, you have 10 days to fight it. And you do that through a claim of exemption in the court, through the sheriff, really. And that is something that you can get assistance from Bay Area Legal Aid, East Bay Community Law Center, HERA. We all help people with these issues. So, feel free to call us and we can help you with that. The key is, just going back to what I said before, you get a complaint against you about a debt, respond within 30 days, and then you have months of time in that case to deal with the case and maybe even get it dismissed or have time to settle with the plaintiff. It just gives you more time. Okay, credit reporting. Okay, I don't think anyone needs to know that credit reports matter. I mean, we all know that they control whether you can get loans. They control the interest rates that you can get. Landlords use credit reports. Insurance uses them. Some employers can use them, not all, but some. So it is important to manage your credit report. And it's something that people avoid, understandably, because it's quite complicated and confusing. Okay, to move everything around so I can see. A credit report. What is a credit report? Okay. Basically, a credit report is going to collect, it's supposed to accurately show your payment history, your public record information, so addresses where you have lived, applications for credit that you've made. It will show whether your account is considered current or delinquent. It will show whether you are in default, bankruptcies, judgments, liens. Some credit reports contain information on criminal history. If an account is in collection, it will show that. So it's not the same. This is an important point on the bottom. It's not the same as your credit score. Your credit report is a really detailed, multi-page document with information about your history. And that information is then used to come up with your credit score. I can't tell you how they use it to come up with the credit score. It is a mystery to most people. I think there are a few people out there who understand how credit scores are computed, but it's fairly a mystery. But it is computed from the information from your credit report. So your credit report is important, and it's important that it's accurate. Okay. So the things that are reported, we already went through this. I've got about 4 minutes if I'm gonna give 10 minutes for questions. So I'm just gonna let you look at this list. Utility bills aren't, rent payments aren't, prepaid cards, those are not, but a lot of things are reported on your credit report. Okay. You have a right to access your credit report for free. If you didn't know that, you have this right. The website on this slide is the right website. There are some scams out there, so make sure you aren't going to the wrong website. You can also call and ask for it. Ordinarily, you have a right to one credit report from each agency per year. But during COVID, because of the CARES Act, they're offering free weekly reports through April 2021. So you can get a lot more reporting right now because of COVID. So here's where we're talking about disputes. I know that was a question before. You can dispute inaccurate information on your credit report. And they do have 30 days to investigate. They can extend that by 15 to 45 days. COVID hasn't really changed it a lot, except this is the section on COVID. They are letting, the 30 and 40-day timelines are being relaxed a bit. Basically, they're not going to get in trouble if they don't meet those deadlines during COVID. And the other, I think, useful piece for all of us is if an account was delinquent before we went into, before March, the creditor is not permitted to report the delinquency if during any accommodation that they're making because of COVID. So for example, some mortgages are offering forbearances during COVID. They can't report that forbearance as delinquent, but they can report the delinquency before the forbearance. So it's a limited protection. Yeah, if you believe you have identity theft, we do assist with that, but you have certain rights, and there are good ways to go about disputing information and making sure that you've registered the fact that you are a victim of identity theft. So we were talking before about how long things can be reported on your report. Negative information, anything that's not good, can generally be reported for 7 years. So if it's more than 7 years old, it shouldn't be showing up on your report. Bankruptcy is different. It can be on your report for 10 years. Okay. So I think I'm gonna go into this. So I'm just gonna move to the next slide. Okay, so it's reading your credit report. Okay, I'm gonna try to do this quick. Okay, so we're looking at an example. When we talk about the trade line, a trade line is going to be any listing of one account. So this account is the Littletown Bank. That's the trade line for Littletown Bank, the account number. It's going to show the balance. This information is supposed to be updated every month, so it should be fairly accurate, but it will also say the date it's updated. They'll say the pay status. This is, right now they're saying this is past due. And then the terms, and then there'll be this long list of payments. These dates are the past payments that were supposed to be made. That's the scheduled payment, $395, the amount that was actually paid. So this is saying that this person didn't pay that amount. So then that's the past due. And then the rating will basically refers to the status. So when this person made their payment in July of 2013, the status was okay. But then when they got behind, their status is 30 days behind. Initially, when you get one of these, it just looks like a bunch of garble, but when you break it down, it's all information you should basically know. If you have a credit card, you're getting these statements, you have an idea about what you owe, what you've paid. So if any of this looks wrong, then you should dispute it, because if it's negative, it's going to impact your credit score. Okay, so now we're going to talk about disputing. So in writing, you need to tell the credit reporting agency, that's Equifax, TransUnion, Experian, what you think is inaccurate. We think it's best to send by certified mail. That just is a way to prove that you sent it. If you have evidence to prove that they're wrong, then you should include that. So if, say, for example, they're saying that you didn't make the payment this month, but you have some proof that you did, or it says on one of your monthly statements that you did, then you can send that to prove to them that they're reporting it wrong. And here's that timeline that we were talking about. They're supposed to respond within 30 days. It can be extended to up to 45 days. During COVID, that can be relaxed a bit, but they're not. I mean, I had a client who we did a dispute, and they were pretty timely recently. And then you also send a letter to the furnisher of the information. So if this is a credit card, you'll send it to MasterCard as well. You'll say, listen, you're reporting this information incorrectly. You're going to tell them the same information that you told the agency. And then both sides have to investigate it. And if they find out that they're wrong, then they have to correct it. They don't have to delete it. They have to correct it, make it right. Okay, I already talked about that. And here's a sample letter. So I'm not going to go over this, but if you want to do this, to dispute something on your credit report, if you want to look at your credit report, go to the website here, this website, and pull your credit report. look at it, use this to help you figure out, what's on there. If you think something's wrong, then you can use this sample letter to send to both the furnisher and the credit reporting agency saying this is wrong. Okay. We already talked about this. This gives you some sense of how they come up with your credit score. Again, it's just kind of a black box mystery, but this is what they say about how they weigh different factors. Okay, I'm running out of time. So these are steps. I think, you can review this. There are lots of different things we've talked about today, ways of just getting your head wrapped around your debt and your credit reporting. This list really just gives you a bunch of different types of things you can do depending on what the debt is, depending on what your situation is. Again, don't pay for credit repair services, don't pay for debt settlement services, don't pay for student loan consolidation. All of these types of scams make you believe that you have to pay for their help. Most of this stuff can be done for free. And then you have these organizations in California that provide free legal advice. So before you pay anyone for this kind of assistance, just realize that you probably don't have to. Okay, that's it. And this is a list of our services. We do a lot of different things, and our information is down here if you would like to seek our assistance with something specific.
Well, Natalie, I appreciate that. And I do want to give people an opportunity to now ask the questions live. So if you would like to actually speak to Natalie for something more specific based on the presentation, you are welcome to do that. I believe you have the option to raise your hand in the participant function or unmute yourself.
Yeah, I think we have a hand raised.
Okay, and let me see if I can see that. I'm trying to find you. Bear with me. Natalie, if you see it, can you tell me the name and then I will go ahead and unmute them?
This gentleman in the glasses, but I don't see a name, so I can't.
Oh, okay.
It's Juan Adami.
Oh, Warren, hi. Oh, hi, how are you, Juan?
Yeah, pretty good. I remember you from the
workshop.
Yeah, from the workshop. Yeah.
One of our last ones before COVID. Good to see you.
Right. Okay, my question is, I know I'm talking about the bankruptcy now. I know you said after 10 years now, will it be completely wiped and disappeared from your credit report, or does it still show up depending on what agencies that look into your credit?
So something happened with my sound. I couldn't hear the beginning of that. It was something about 10 years. Can you go? Sorry to make you repeat.
Oh, no, I was just saying, I know you, after 10 years for your bankruptcy, does it completely wipe away from your credit report? Completely disappears?
It should. If it doesn't, it should. If it doesn't, then you just contact you might have to dispute it to get them. Okay. I mean, just because they're supposed to do something doesn't mean they do. Right. But yeah, you can dispute it if it's been more than 10 years and it's still showing up.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions?
No, I think everything was pretty much clear.
Thank you. Is anyone else would like to ask a live question? And we are getting some additional questions via the chat. So I'll go ahead and get those over to you, Natalie. To review my credit score, or to review my credit report, because on credit rating agency, it's off by 26 points compared to the other two. Who do I work with? So, so Natalie, do you want to address that?
Well, so credit scores are hard for me to address because it's just not,
I
it's hard.
might be able to provide some insight.
Yeah.
So the first to know that not all creditors report to all three bureaus. So that's the reason why there's oftentimes discrepancy between one or the other. Macy's doesn't report to TransUnion or vice versa. Depending on if you've actually gotten your tri-merge report or actually gone to the credit bureau and pulled your credit score, if you see a big variance, we could assist, meaning Richmond Neighborhood Housing Services, to assist where that variance is coming from. But if you're using Credit Karma or some of the online credit trackers, it's not unusual that you're going to have a big variance. So one, I would say it depends on where you're getting that credit score from to see that variance. And two, depending on what creditors are reporting to what credit bureau. So if you'd like more information, we can definitely assist in reviewing that and trying to determine why there's such a big gap or difference. Let's see. I was going to answer this question via the chat, but the other question was, knowing that 30% of the credit score is determined by utilization, a person is having a challenge staying, below that 30%. And part of our counseling agency assists with creating budgets. So we could potentially work with you, and we have kind of mastered our own little debt acceleration program to kind of help start eliminating debt just by reworking how you're budgeting and where the extra dollars could possibly go to get you the impact that you need. So if you'd like more information on that, you can always email me. And what I will say, as we are fielding questions or waiting for last minute questions, because we are at the 8 o'clock hour, please, reach out to our organization. Let's see what the issue is. We'll say that we're no expert in managing the dispute of credit, but we can definitely help in managing how to get the credit score to an area in which you are, most empowered. But you have HERA's information here. If you go through us and we know that HERA would be a better solution, we can also do a transfer or referral to them as well. So I will say, since it's 8 o'clock, we appreciate the evening that you have spent with us. Please submit your survey. Those that do submit the survey will enter a chance to win a gift card. Natalie, not to impose on your evening too much, but if there is any last minute questions
Sure.
for people who can stay on, we're here to answer your questions. We'll give people a couple of minutes, but if not, we'll, let everyone go ahead and enjoy their evening.
Yeah.
So again, if you have any last minute questions, this would be the time to either raise your hand so you can ask it personally or put it in the chat box.
Okay. Thank you so much for the information. It was great.
Well, thank you for joining us. And please keep us posted on your progress.
Certainly will. Thank you.
Thank you. Hey, Natalie, it looks like most people are signing off and saying goodnight. So really appreciate you spending your evening with us. Remember, you will get access to the presentation as well as the audio. So make it a great night, you guys. And thanks again for joining us.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good night.
Have a good night.